Teaching transmission is enthusing. Every morning I wake up to go to teach. I know that I will discover a new approach of the piece which I happened to frequent for the last 4 decades or more. I don't go there with a mindset to just stamp my point of view, opinion, experience, tradition, conviction, while guidance, I respect the intuition, talent, calling, necessity, drive that brings students from so far away to seek how to better serve the muse, how to better mean the piece, how to better meaningfully, more than only better, bring to be what they perceive, perhaps not very clearly, they have to do to accomplish it on the technical aspect, on the structural aspect, on the evolutionary aspect, of the stylistic aspect, especially when the music was spontaneous in its own time period, and now it's frozen in editions, in recordings, but it's still alive while played. It's not a museum piece. It's still the miracle of the beauty of the moment, ephemeral as it is, as meaningful as it is or was differently to people before and will be after too. So I feel like sometimes a little bit in a situation where I have to be controlling my desire not to spoon feed them. I cannot do it anyway, ethically. Therefore, the musicianship is there. The funnel is narrow between the editions which are more and more specific about the authenticity of a given detail of interpretational placement of an accent indication, any detail that when you're a passionate person about any kind of trade, then you decide to be detailed and you realize that you can be so fine-tuning. Of course, when you play the piece that is famous to the other musicians who are going to judge you, evaluate you, rate you, grade you, eliminate you, pass you, or prefer you, if it's an exam, an audition, in a concert, performance in a degree, or a position to be occupied to teach in turn, I feel like we are stuck between the tradition, the obligation to serve the score exactly as it says. And where it touches a problem is that no matter how much the intentions of the composer are transparent to our musicianship's reading, by the harmonies, the melody, the harmonic organization, the rhythmic, the pulse, in other words, all this is hinted, suggested, fine. But then come all the indications, all the possibilities to check with the manuscript or to compare with earlier editions. And then, of course, once you get out of the detail, you go to the whole. And what do you see? Is the spontaneity of the flow of the statement. There are rhythms, there are pitches. Therefore, in a way, it's pre-chewed. All we have to do is just spit it, so to say. Perhaps it's vulgar. I would say something more like, we recite it. But we have to be believable. It has to come from us, even if it's not ours. And if we really, and that's where the problem occurs, in my opinion, as a teacher, is that I grew up to believe that some of the indications don't fulfill the flow of the event, the dramaturgy of the things, the choreography, if you want, if it was a ballet, the way of expressing the statement, the breathing, the spacing, the interruption of silences, the infinite amount of details which put together appear to be what they have to sound when the listener listens in a flow where it seems barless, seems without downbeat and upbeat. It seems just a free narration. They come for a storytelling. They want to be engaged in the storytelling, and you want to be compelling with the storytelling because it means to you from the music itself, the score, the notation, and you bring it alive ephemerally for the moment where you will be there with it before perhaps you argue even against yourself and say, after I heard it on a recording, I disagree even the way I did it because I would do this transition this way and I would prepare this further and I will organize this way to merge in traffic. All kinds of analogies to bring us to express it in its complete idealization that we have in ourselves from the piece itself, and of course interpretations of others. But it could appear arrogant for the teacher to say, oh, I disagree with this edition or this indication, even if it's by the composer, because I think I feel it better structurally bringing the attention to that release at this point, and then strategically organizing it either very analytically, either just by the spontaneous experience of having played it often and realizing how it sits in the performance, at least with your own temperament compared to your own audience. Of course, the instrument, the acoustics, all this enter in account, and of course, it's not a rigid thing. It reveals itself differently every time. It's a bit of a comet, and the tail is highlighted by some situations, and then all of a sudden the piece is revealed to you differently because of an acoustical instrument that has a different approach of the length of sound. And so you have to be constantly alert, not always trying to just reproduce something that reassures you, even if technically that is what you practice repetitively towards. But then it's mostly about dealing with the unexpected of the moment. And when I have experienced the piece on stage many times, after I had learned it myself when I was a student, and in turn, the student is discovering it differently. And then we look together at the same score, seeking to read behind, between the notes, the hints of the unmeasured ornament, the way to express the meaningful note by having the two hands not played together, just for that note, or perhaps delay a diminuendo, or start a crescendo, or organize the system, and then while you play it, I observe and monitor the student as if they're recording themselves. I become their ears from outside while they have their ears from inside. So it becomes like seeking of some kind of internal truth, where the indications on the score become either an ally, either an impeding situation where you feel like I'm stifled by all these rules because I feel the way the phrasing has to go is by this group of bars leading me to that punctuation, to that cadence. And then you feel like, because of the plethora of interpretations, music schools, publications, and availability of recordings, you can think that a famous piece has been explored and dealt with in all aspects. But no, every human brings their own factor. And when they play this piece. And so I'm sometimes amazed by the intuitive power that is there in these young people who discover the piece already at levels it took me time to get to by my own experiences. It's not a competition about when, how, and to which point to get there. You know, the tempo, the phrasing, the articulation, the pedaling, the breathing, the harmony, the melody, the rubato, the how much and what is good and bad taste and who defines it and what defines it. And is everything really embedded in the text, since we have no other experience than this, other than imagining how Chopin, Schubert, Liszt, Schubert, Beethoven, Mozart, and the others played their own music. Perhaps they were not that inevitably set on details of interpretation, since they played themselves the music which they mostly improvised and later set on score to be published and performed. So we have this echo of their spontaneity that even read from the text of the codified indications, it becomes alive just like free prose. And of course, the judgmental situations of colleagues who will be judging my students at different stages of their life, defining what is convincing from what is personal, from what is respectful, and from what is informed. And at which point a personal approach of the interpretation would be read by a given jury member, professional musician, performer of the piece, arrogant or obedient or creative or refreshing. Two sides of the same coin, depends on the point of view of the level of tolerance of the professional musician versus the non-professional musicians who would hear the piece and adhere to the performer because of the conviction that the performer carries through the emotion, the drive, the meaning. They wouldn't know if it's right or not according to this or that authentic edition. They're not scholars, like all the film watchers are not cinematographers, and etc. But nevertheless, we appreciate the subtleties, even if we don't understand them, because they're hints, they're there. It's there. So I try to make sure that my students are given the opportunity to be informed about my point of view, of my experience through the piece, with the tradition of the teachers I have received it from, but also the way it has evolved through my life as a performer, as a teacher. It's not exactly the same, because as a performer I can allow myself some freedoms because I don't engage in responsibility, the trust that they entrusted in me, the students. I don't want to misguide them by giving them false hopes of a certain level of freedom with the text that would backfire at them at a jury and at an exam, because they have to go through these hurdles themselves before they establish themselves, if they do, and how they do. So it's a delicate situation in which I take at heart to be attuned to their yearning, individual, each student, with the same piece, even if it's been taught to so many others, and in each case find with the individual approach of their own physicality, because no two hands are built the same way while playing the same piece with the same keyboard. One size doesn't fit all in every aspect, but specifically in technical aspect. Of course, the advantage of adjusting to the individual morphology for each is that then their fingerings, if they fit well as a glove in their hand, give them a sense of confidence. And when they have stage fright or they're afraid of messing up a section, because while they repeatedly practiced it, going through with the whole piece, sometimes, most of the times, it doesn't come out like it was supposed to. Once you apply all these practicing tactics and exercises. So all overall, I find myself in a situation where I have to a little bit what Mademoiselle Boulanger told me to do, which is be very tolerant with everybody and very unforgiving with yourself. If I try to apply that, it's very hard. I mean, honestly, because it's so much easier to criticize everybody. They don't know what they do, not supposed to be done that way. But when you don't do it well yourself, you say, oh, I'm tired, or, find some excuse, but never excuse for the others. So if you are unforgiving for yourself, but tolerant with the others, you accept the alterity, the difference, the fact that these students are not just puppets, and I'm not a puppeteer, that we are there in an exchange with mature young people who, in fact, mature early because they the practice, the trade of the rehearsing, practicing every day since childhood creates a difference in the way you approach mid-long-term progress, expectation, and dealing with disappointment when you fail. All this makes you grow up quickly, and at the same time, it develops also a sense of vulnerability as well, because you feel like all of your life holds in one audition day where you have to play it at the best of your ability, regardless of how you could have played it better the day before or after. That's serendipity, that's life, that is. And so the more technique, the more fingerings, the more management of hands distribution other than the indication of the score brings you to have an interpretation which is unfiltered by technical worries. But where is the margin between the creative interpretation of a given dynamic range compared to a timing of it that is different according to, let's say, the way you pedal it, where you capture the harmony after it happened or before it becomes blurry? There are factors where, in a way, the way you coat the, so to say, body of the piece that you play brings a different aspect to the whole piece itself. And perhaps you didn't intend it, but that's how it comes out. That's why I'm there to monitor, to correct, to find positions, flat thumb in scales or not, and passage of hand of the thumb and the wrist, and then the amount of pushing of the fingers in the keys in order to neither bang nor get tense and perhaps even stuck with the tendons. In other words, there is a physical management at the same time as a musical management, while storytelling management, which are usually the theater director, the stage director, the conductor of the orchestra, and the musicians who play, but it's separate people in a synergy, or sometimes in I would say, cauldron of energy between the conductor pulling with the pulse and the musicians playing the notes on the beat. That happens all in one person when you play solo, since it's a polyphonic instrument and the writing is very often so with complex textures. You have to manage independent layers, you have to manage shifting basses, you have to manage harmonizations that come with delay, you have to manage the melody, the way the speech of the music itself, the storytelling, the narrative aspect of it, never twice the same way, while with metronomic objective times of number of beats a minute, you get to the point where you say, okay, I have an idea how to lock it in. And then if you play in chamber music or a concerto with a conductor and you disagree on the feel of the tempo, if it's in 2 or in 4, in 3, or how you, and then you have to play it, not only conceptually think of it, either through the pulse or the structure or the scholar, musicologist's opinion of how the piece is supposed to be through the very notation of this very edition that, while authentic, also brings opinions of those who edit it. So there's so many layers between what you perceive intuitively is what the composer's inspiration was about, and then the details through the notation, filtered by the experience either of the teacher, and also of other performers who are very influential. When you go to a concert sometimes and you have a piece that revealed to you by some amazing performer, it's worth 100 lessons in an hour. And they're untold with words. They're just hinted with the way the phrase, the way the music is basically unveiled through, of course, the fingers and the soul and the mind and the imagination of the performer. So at this point, you don't know how much is the performer whom you admire or the piece that the performer plays by itself, and how much is doctored by the interpretation. Of course, at this point, it's not an audition, an exam, a jury. It's just a recital you go to, and then you reach a point where you think, I'm enthused. It's incredible. I would like to play it like this. It's supposed to be like this. I always dreamed to have it hear it like this being played. I would like to play it like this one day. And by the time you reach the way you play it, is it about technique and musicianship and not opposite but together? Then you put all this energy in one, and you become your conductor and your musicologist and your orchestra and your even teacher. You record yourself even for a section, you listen to it when you don't actively play it in order to observe how much of what you intended happens or how much of what you think you did really went through. Because if you're very musical, you hear the music more than you hear it as it's played, even by yourself. You hear it inside your world, like when you read a book in the middle of a crowd and you connect with the author's characters and you're already in isolation from the world, in your inner world, connected to the inner world of the author's imagination. And you don't need somebody to read it to you. And perhaps you misread it by yourself. Perhaps you love it for the wrong reasons, or perhaps you finally found the truth about it, if you think there is one to be found. But it's an individual, personal connection. And when the musician is intuitively, strongly built, so would it be the ear, hearing, the ear, eye, finger, speed, and then the brain, then the soul, then the emotion, and then the capacity of culture enough to understand the stylistic time period, and then how to translate that on the modern piano if it wasn't written for that. All these things happen in a split second. They don't have to be all displayed to the audience. It's not a concert, is not a conference. A lesson is to explain things, but not everything finds words that translate. If not, music wouldn't be a language on its own. After all, even if it means to us a lot that we can translate in words, at some point it's only what it is by itself. It's a language of its own, after all. And it is. Except that it can mean so different things, even to the detail, for different musicians. And whenever a student is not driven by musical intuition, or not enough, or not at all, and is playing to, let's say, roughly said, to please. A parent when a child, a teacher when a young person, and then perhaps becomes a profession because it becomes a pursuit of some kind of dream through competitive field of performers, and then you end up by learning how to make it appear as if you are really involved in it, even if deep inside you, you're a good maker, but you're not really the one who feels that you're connected to it. And so if the interpretation comes as some kind of a layer on top of a layer between the score and the piece itself, then you could change of it like you change a coat, and like you change a diet, or you change a conviction or a religion or something. Not that any of these are as easy to do, and I don't intend to be so superficial when I mention them, but nevertheless, at the core of it, you have a belief. And if you don't have a strong belief and you just do to please, then you end up, in fact, by playing very convincingly, because in a way you're not disturbed by things that you cannot not do. Because in fact you can do anything, since it's pleasant for you to please. I know it sounds a bit superficial when I say it, but it's what it is, because if you have a perfect pitch or not, if you have a conviction about the piece, if you have some way where the teacher's opinion disturbs you because it's not part of your intuition, it's not to do with wrong notes that you misguessed, that you hoped, that you liked your way, and then you discover how it is, because it's not good or bad, it's wrong or right. But in the process, you learn about the interpretation of the piece through the way you connect to the piece itself. And when it means to you so much, and the indication of the score says something differently in the interpretation, even if it's authentic or authenticated from the different publishers that you seek the answers from to make sure that you're in the truth of the, let's say, closeness to the original material or the original score, the handwriting, let's say, if it was. And then you contradict it. So is it arrogance? Is it being not obedient? Is it a creative disobedience? As a teacher, I cannot encourage it while I have to guide it so that they can think outside of the box, but serve even better what is in the box. Because then they will progressively break these barriers of the guidance, which in fact is locking you in rules, written ones in the text or told by the teachers. And then that necessity to express yourself within the piece, beyond the piece. Mademoiselle Boulanger used to tell me, if you don't like it the way it's written, say, I don't understand, I'll try again. Don't say, I don't like it. But mostly, write your own piece, or then play like it's written, the piece of the person you play. Regardless how you misunderstand, dislike, or whatever. Now, not everybody becomes a composer or is a composer or needs to be a composer. That is also partly the educational system, but also the fact of the calling. And there is a lot of satisfaction in doing exactly what's written on the score and becoming as meaningful as your own when you translate it to the audience. After all, you don't make it up. You don't fake it. You serve it in detail. You respect it, you love it, you practice it, and you clear it up so that it can become flawless, and you memorize it, and you feel like you appropriate it, and you perform it. And then on the way, things happen between stage fright and unexpected cognitive problem with the finger goes on the wrong key. And then all of a sudden, the dominoes fall all apart, and you're like, oh my God, I planned all this, and now I have to deal with that wreck through the piece until the end of the performance. Perhaps it's not as dramatic every time, but in a split second, those things happen. In the unexperienced, by essence, young students' lives with the piece. So the more you play it on different instruments for different people in different times, the more you learn about how much you know the piece, besides only the theoretized way of learning it, when you have to organize the knowledge of it, between the fingerings, the memorization, the tempo, everything. But then it reveals itself differently if the action of a given piano is heavier, if the acoustic is dry or wet, and then and you feel differently when you know that some people hear you that know the piece, or people hear you that don't know the piece. You feel perhaps more free or less, or more caged, in fact, or perhaps both at different times. Not every section of the piece has the same dilemma for you in terms of conviction, doubt, hope, and then disappointment if you practice and it didn't come out. So at many levels, students learn about practicing towards, hope to organize their statement musically said, and then deal with the disappointment if it didn't go well here or there, or more or less, or less or more. And I'm there before, during, and after for them. Guide, advise, give my personal experience about how to organize a slow tempo in order to not to get slower, or a fast tempo in order to be able to articulate it clearly. In other words, not push too much the keys too heavy, but from close up and deep, but not and fast at every dynamic range. So the touch control and then the capacity to organize a musical idea at the end are ingredients that I give them for them to cook it their own. Because I'm not there to, and I can't even imagine, have a remote control and play it for them. That's, of course, silly, disrespectful, meaningless. And if at one end of the spectrum you can say in that thought, after all, if they hear it, feel it so clearly, and they're so driven, talented, intuitively strong for it, and they are hard practicers, they'll figure it out anyway. It'll take them longer. Perhaps I can shortcut some of the situations by giving them the benefit of my experience in the piece, but I cannot just transpose it on them because it's not me, it's them, or him or her individually, rather, one-to-one. Bring them freedom and vigor all in one. All their life in one each note.